A slight oscillation showed Dante that all went well. At the end of an hour, the stone was extricated from the wall, leaving a cavity 1.5 feet in diameter. Dante carefully collected the plaster, carried it into the corner of his cell, and covered it with earth. Then, wishing to make the best use of his time while he had the means of labour, he continued to work without ceasing. At the dawn of day, he replaced the stone, pushed his bed against the wall, and lay down. The breakfast consisted of a piece of bread. The jailer entered and placed the bread on the table.
"Well, don't you intend to bring me another plate?"
said Dante.
"No," replied the turnkey. "You destroy everything. First you break your jug, then you make me break your plate. If all the prisoners followed your example, the government would be ruined. I shall leave you the saucepan and pour your soup into that. So for the future, I hope you will not be so destructive."
Dante raised his eyes to heaven and clasped his hands beneath the coverlet. He felt more gratitude for the possession of his piece of iron than he had ever felt for anything. He'd noticed, however, that the prisoner on the other side had ceased to labour. No matter. This was a greater reason for proceeding. If his neighbour would not come to him, he would go to his neighbour. All day he toiled on untiringly, and by the evening he had succeeded in extracting 10 handfuls of plaster and fragments of stone. When the hour for his jailer's visit arrived, Dante straightened the handle of the saucepan as well as he could and placed it in its accustomed place. The turnkey poured his ration of soup into it, together with the fish. For thrice a week the prisoners were deprived of meat. This would have been a method of reckoning time had not Dante long ceased to do so. Having poured out the soup, the turnkey retired. Dante wished to ascertain whether his neighbour had really ceased to work. He listened. All was silent, as it had been for the last 3 days. Dante sighed. It was evident that his neighbour distrusted him. However, he toiled on all the night without being discouraged. But after 2 or 3 hours he encountered an obstacle. The iron made no impression, but met with a smooth surface. Dante touched it, and found that it was a beam. This beam crossed, or rather blocked up the hole Dante had made. It was necessary, therefore, to dig above or under it. The unhappy young man had not thought of this. "Oh, my God, murmured he. "I have so earnestly prayed to you that I hope my prayers have been heard. After having deprived me of my liberty, after having deprived me of death, after having recalled me to existence, my God, have pity on me and do not let me die in despair." "Who talks of God and despair at the same time?" said a voice that seemed to come from beneath the earth, and deadened by the distance, sounded hollow and sepulchral in the young man's ears. Edmond's hair stood on end, and he rose to his knees. "Ah," said he, "I hear a human voice." Edmond had not heard anyone speak save his jailer for 4 or 5 years, and a jailer is no man to a prisoner. He is a living door, a barrier of flesh and blood, adding strength to the restraints of oak and iron. "In the name of heaven," cried Dante, "speak again, though the sound of your voice terrifies me. Who are you?" "Who are you?" said the voice. "An unhappy prisoner," replied Dante, who made no hesitation in answering. "Of what country?" "A Frenchman." "Your name?" "Edmond Dante." "Your profession?" "A sailor." "How long have you been here?" "Since the 28th of February, 1815. "Your crime?" "I am innocent." "But of what are you accused?" "Of having conspired to aid the Emperor's return." "What? For the Emperor's return? The Emperor is no longer on the throne. He abdicated at Fontainebleau in 1814 and was sent to the island of Elba. But how long have you been here that you are ignorant of all this?" "Since 1811. Dante shuddered. This man had been 4 years longer than himself imprisoned. "Do not dig any more," said the voice. Only tell me how high is your excavation? On a level with the floor. How is it concealed? Behind my bed. Has your bed been moved since you have been a prisoner? No. What does your chamber open on? A corridor. And the corridor? On a court. Alas, murmured the voice. Oh, what is the matter? Cried Dante. I have made a mistake owing to an error in my plans. I took the wrong angle and have come out 15 feet from where I intended. I took the wall you are mining for the outer wall of the fortress. But then you would be close to the sea. That is what I hoped. And supposing you had succeeded, I should have thrown myself into the sea, gained one of the islands near here, the Ile de Dôme or the Ile de Tiboulon, and then I should have been safe. Could you have swum so far? Heaven would have given me strength, but now all is lost. All? Yes. Stop up your excavation carefully. Do not work anymore, and wait until you hear from me. Tell me at least who you are. I am a number 27. You mistrust me then, said Dante. Edmund fancied he heard a bitter laugh resounding from the depths. Oh, I am a Christian, cried Dante, guessing instinctively that this man meant to abandon him. I swear to you, by him who died for us, that naught shall induce me to breathe one syllable to my jailers. But I conjure you, do not abandon me. If you do, I swear to you, for I have got to the end of my strength, that I will dash my brains out against the wall, and you will have my death to reproach yourself with. How old are you? Your voice is that of a young man. I do not know my age, for I have not counted the years I have been here. All I do know is that I was just 19 when I was arrested, the 28th of February, 1815. Not quite 26, murmured the voice. At that age, he cannot be a traitor. Oh, no, no, cried Dante. I swear to you, again, rather than betray you, I would allow myself to be hacked in pieces. You have done well to speak to me, and ask for my assistance. For I was about to form another plan and leave you, but your age reassures me. I will not forget you. Wait. How long? I must calculate our chances. I will give you the signal. But you will not leave me. You will come to me, or you will let me come to you. We will escape. And if we cannot escape, we will talk. You of those whom you love, and I of those whom I love. You must love somebody. No, I am alone in the world. Then you will love me. If you are young, I will be your comrade. If you are old, I will be your son. I have a father who is 70 if he yet lives. I only love him and a young girl called Mercedes. My father has not yet forgotten me, I am sure. But God alone knows if she loves me still. I shall love you as I loved my father. It is well, returned the voice. Tomorrow. These few words were uttered with an accent that left no doubt of his sincerity. Dante rose, dispersed the fragments with the same precaution as before, and pushed his bed back against the wall. He then gave himself up to his happiness. He would no longer be alone. He was, perhaps, about to regain his liberty. At the worst, he would have a companion, and captivity that is shared is but half captivity. Plaints made in common are almost prayers, and prayers where 2 or 3 are gathered together invoke the mercy of heaven. All day, Dante walked up and down his cell. He sat down occasionally on his bed, pressing his hand on his heart. At the slightest noise, he bounded towards the door. Once or twice the thought crossed his mind that he might be separated from this unknown, whom he loved already. And then his mind was made up. When the jailer moved his bed and stooped to examine the opening, he would kill him with his water jug. He would be condemned to die, but he was about to die of grief and despair when this miraculous noise recalled him to life. The jailer came in the evening. Dante was on his bed. It seemed to him that thus he better guarded the unfinished opening. Doubtless there was a strange expression in his eyes, for the jailer said, "Come, are you going mad again?" Dante did not answer. He feared that the emotion of his voice would betray him. The jailer went away, shaking his head. Night came. Dante hoped that his neighbour would profit by the silence to address him, but he was mistaken. The next morning, however, just as he removed his bed from the wall, he heard 3 knocks. He threw himself on his knees. "Is it you?" said he. "I am here." "Is your jailer gone?" "Yes," said Dante. "You will not return until the evening, so that we have 12 hours before us." "I can work then?" said the voice. "Oh yes, this is instant, I entreat you." In a moment, that part of the floor on which Dante was resting his hands as he knelt with his head in the opening suddenly gave way. He drew back smartly, while a mass of stones and earth disappeared in a hole that opened beneath the aperture he himself had formed. Then from the bottom of this passage, the depth of which it was impossible to measure, he saw appear first the head, then the shoulders, and lastly the body of a man, who sprang lightly into his cell. End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 16. A Learned Italian. Seizing in his arms the friend so long and ardently desired, Dante almost carried him towards the window in order to obtain a better view of his features by the aid of the imperfect light that struggled through the grating. He was a man of small stature, with hair blanched rather by suffering and sorrow than by age. He had a deep-set, penetrating eye almost buried beneath the thick grey eyebrow, and a long and still black beard reaching down to his breast. His thin face, deeply furrowed by care, and the bold outline of his strongly marked features betokened a man more accustomed to exercise his mental faculties than his physical strength. Large drops of perspiration were now standing on his brow, while the garments that hung about him were so ragged that one could only guess at the pattern upon which they had originally been fashioned. The stranger might have numbered 60 or 65 years, but a certain briskness and appearance of vigour in his movements made it probable that he was aged more from captivity than the course of time. He received the enthusiastic greeting of his young acquaintance with evident pleasure, as though his chilled affections were rekindled and invigorated by his contact with one so warm and ardent. He thanked him with grateful cordiality for his kindly welcome, although he must at that moment have been suffering bitterly to find another dungeon, where he had fondly reckoned on discovering a means of regaining his liberty. "Let us first see," said he, "whether it is possible to remove the traces of my entrance here. Our future tranquillity depends upon our jailers being entirely ignorant of it." Advancing to the opening, he stooped and raised the stone easily, in spite of its weight. Then, fitting it into its place, he said, "You removed the stone very carelessly, but I suppose you had no tools to aid you." "Why?" exclaimed Dante with astonishment. "Do you possess any?" "I made myself some, and with the exception of a file, I have all that are necessary: a chisel, pincers, and a lever." "Oh, how I should like to see those products of your industry and patience." "Well, in the first place, here is my chisel." So saying, he displayed a sharp, strong blade, with a handle made of beechwood. "And with what did you contrive to make that?" inquired Dante. "With one of the clamps of my bedstead, and this very tool has sufficed me to hollow out the road by which I came hither, a distance of about 50 feet. 50 feet, responded Dante, almost terrified.
Do not speak so loud, young man. Don't speak so loud. It frequently occurs in a state prison like this that persons are stationed outside of the doors of the cells, purposely to overhear the conversation of the prisoners. But they believe I am shut up alone here. That makes no difference. And you say that you dug your way a distance of 50 feet to get here? I do. That is about the distance that separates your chamber from mine. Only, unfortunately, I did not curve right, for want of the necessary geometrical instruments to calculate my scale of proportion. Instead of taking an ellipsis of 40 feet, I made it 50. I expected, as I told you, to reach the outer wall, pierce through it, and to throw myself into the sea. I have, however, kept along the corridor in which your chamber opens, instead of going beneath it. My labor is all in vain, for I find that the corridor looks into a courtyard filled with soldiers.
That's true, said Dante.
But the corridor you speak of only bounds one side of my cell. There are 3 others.
Do you know anything of their situation?
This one is built against the solid rock, and it would take 10 experienced miners, duly furnished with the requisite tools, as many years to perforate it. This adjoins the lower part of the governor's apartments, and were we to work our way through, we should only get into some lock-up cells, where we must necessarily be recaptured. The 4th and last side of your cell faces on, stop a minute. Now where does it face?
The wall of which he spoke was the one in which was fixed the loophole by which light was admitted to the chamber. This loophole, which gradually diminished in size as it approached the outside to an opening through which a child could not have passed, was, for better security, furnished with 3 iron bars, so as to quiet all apprehensions, even in the mind of the most suspicious jailer, as to the possibility of a prisoner's escape. As the stranger asked the question, he dragged the table beneath the window.
Climb up,
said he to Dante. The young man obeyed, mounted on the table, and divining the wishes of his companion, placed his back securely against the wall and held out both hands. The stranger, whom as yet Dante knew only by the number of his cell, sprang up with an agility by no means to be expected in a person of his years, and light and steady on his feet as a cat or a lizard, climbed from the table to the outstretched hands of Dante, and from them to his shoulders. Then, bending double, for the ceiling of the dungeon prevented him from holding himself erect, he managed to slip his head between the upper bars of the window, so as to be able to command a perfect view from top to bottom. An instant afterwards he hastily drew back his head, saying, "I thought so," and sliding from the shoulders of Dante, as dexterously as he had descended, he nimbly leapt from the table to the ground. "What was it that you thought?" asked the young man anxiously, in his turn descending from the table. The elder prisoner pondered the matter.
"Yes," said he at length, "it is so. This side of your chamber looks out upon a kind of open gallery, where patrols are continually passing, and sentries keep watch day and night."
"Are you quite sure of that?"
"Certain. I saw the soldier's shape, and the top of his musket. That made me draw my head so quickly, for I was fearful he might also see me."
"Well?" inquired Dante.
"You perceive, then, the utter impossibility of escaping through your dungeon."
"Then?" pursued the young man eagerly.
"Then,"
answered the elder prisoner,
"the will of God be done."
and as the old man slowly pronounced those words, an air of profound resignation spread itself over his careworn countenance. Dante gazed on the man who could thus philosophically resign hopes so long and ardently nourished, with an astonishment mingled with admiration.
"Tell me, I entreat you, who and what you are," said he at length.
Never have I met with so remarkable a person as yourself. Willingly, answered the stranger. If indeed you feel any curiosity respecting one, now alas powerless to aid you in any way. Say not so. You can console and support me by the strength of your own powerful mind. Pray, let me know who you really are. The stranger smiled a melancholy smile. Then listen, said he. I am the Abbe Faria, and have been imprisoned, as you know, in this Chateau d'If since the year 1811. Previously to which I had been confined for 3 years in the fortress of Fenestrelle. In the year 1811 I was transferred to Piedmont in France. It was at this period I learned that the destiny which seemed subservient to every wish formed by Napoleon had bestowed on him a son, named King of Rome even in his cradle. I was very far then from expecting the change you have just informed me of, namely that 4 years afterwards this colossus of power would be overthrown. Then who reigns in France at this moment? Napoleon II? No, Louis XVIII. The brother of Louis XVII? How inscrutable are the ways of Providence! For what great and mysterious purpose has it pleased heaven to abase the man once so elevated, and raise up him who was so abased? Dante's whole attention was riveted on a man who could thus forget his own misfortunes while occupying himself with the destinies of others. Yes, yes, continued he, it will be the same as it was in England. After Charles I, Cromwell. After Cromwell, Charles II, and then James II, and then some son-in-law or relation, some Prince of Orange, a stadtholder who becomes a king. Then new concessions to the people, then a constitution, then liberty. Ah, my friend, said the Abbé, turning towards Dante and surveying him with the kindling gaze of a prophet. You are young. You will see all this come to pass. Probably, if ever I get out of prison. True, replied Faria. We are prisoners, but I forget this sometimes, and there are even moments when my mental vision transports me beyond these walls, and I fancy myself at liberty. But wherefore are you here? Because in 1807 I dreamed of the very plan Napoleon tried to realize in 1811. Because, like Machiavelli, I desired to alter the political face of Italy, and instead of allowing it to be split up into a quantity of petty principalities, each held by some weak or tyrannical ruler, I sought to form one large, compact, and powerful empire. And lastly, because I fancied I had found my Caesar Borgia in a crowned simpleton, who feigned to enter into my views only to betray me. It was the plan of Alexander VI and Clement VII. But it will never succeed now, for they attempted it fruitlessly, and Napoleon was unable to complete his work. Italy seems fated to misfortune. And the old man bowed his head. Dante could not understand a man risking his life for such matters. Napoleon certainly he knew something of, inasmuch as he had seen and spoken with him. But of Clement VII and Alexander VI he knew nothing. Are you not, he asked, the priest who here in Chateau d'If is generally thought to be ill? Mad, you mean, don't you? I did not like to say so, answered Dante, smiling. Well then, resumed Faria with a bitter smile, let me answer your question in full, by acknowledging that I am the poor mad prisoner of the Chateau d'If, for many years permitted to amuse the different visitors with what is said to be my insanity, and in all probability I should be promoted to the honor of making sport for the children, if such innocent beings could be found in an abode devoted like this to suffering and despair. Dante remained for a short time mute and motionless. At length he said, Then you abandon all hope of escape? I perceive its utter impossibility, and I consider it impious to attempt that which the Almighty evidently does not approve. Nay, but do not be discouraged. Would it not be expecting too much to hope to succeed at your first attempt? Why not try to find an opening in another direction from that which has so unfortunately failed? Alas, it shows how little notion you can have of all it has cost me to effect a purpose so unexpectedly frustrated that you talk of beginning over again. In the first place, I was 4 years making the tools I possess, and have been 2 years scraping and digging out earth hard as granite itself. Then what toil and fatigue has it not been to remove huge stones I should once have deemed impossible to loosen? Whole days have I passed in these titanic efforts, considering my labor well repaid, if by night time I had contrived to carry away a square inch of this hard-bound cement, changed by ages into a substance unyielding as the stones themselves. Then to conceal the mass of earth and rubbish I dug up, I was compelled to break through a staircase and throw the fruits of my labor into the hollow part of it. But the well is now so completely choked up that I scarcely think it would be possible to add another handful of dust without leading to discovery. Consider also that I fully believed I had accomplished the end aim of my undertaking, for which I had so exactly husbanded my strength as to make it just hold out to the termination of my enterprise. And now, at the moment when I reckoned upon success, my hopes are forever dashed from me. No, I repeat again, that nothing will induce me to renew attempts evidently at variance with the Almighty's pleasure. Dante held down his head, that the other might not see how joy at the thought of having a companion outweighed the sympathy he felt for the failure of the Abbé's plans. The Abbé sank upon Edmond's bed, while Edmond himself remained standing. Escape had never once occurred to him. There are indeed some things which appear so impossible that the mind does not dwell on them for an instant. To undermine the ground for 50 feet, to devote 3 years to a labour which, if successful, would conduct you to a precipice overhanging the sea, to plunge into the waves from the height of 50, 60, perhaps 100 feet at the risk of being dashed to pieces against the rocks, should you have been fortunate enough to have escaped the fire of the sentinels, and even supposing all these perils past, then to have to swim for your life a distance of at least 3 miles ere you could reach the shore, were difficulties so startling and formidable that Dante had never even dreamed of such a scheme, resigning himself rather to death. But the sight of an old man clinging to life with so desperate a courage gave a fresh turn to his ideas and inspired him with new courage. Another, older and less strong than he, had attempted what he had not had sufficient resolution to undertake, and had failed only because of an error in calculation. This same person, with almost incredible patience and perseverance, had contrived to provide himself with tools requisite for so unparalleled an attempt. Another had done all this. Why then was it impossible to Dante? Faria had dug his way through 50 feet. Dante would dig 100. Faria, at the age of 50, had devoted 3 years to the task. He, who was but half as old, would sacrifice 6. Faria, a priest and savant, had not shrunk from the idea of risking his life by trying to swim a distance of 3 miles to one of the islands, Dôme, Ratonneau, or Lunaire. Should a hardy sailor, an experienced diver like himself, shrink from a similar task? Should he, who had so often, for mere amusement's sake, plunged to the bottom of the sea to fetch up the bright coral branch, hesitate to entertain the same project? He could do it in an hour. And how many times had he, for pure pastime, continued in the water for more than twice as long? At once, Dante resolved to follow the brave example of his energetic companion. and to remember that what has once been done may be done again. After continuing some time in profound meditation, the young man suddenly exclaimed, "I have found what you are in search of." Faria started. "Have you indeed?" cried he, raising his head with quick anxiety. "Pray, let me know what it is you have discovered." "The corridor through which you have bored your way from the cell you occupy here extends in the same direction as the outer gallery, does it not?" "It does, and is not above 15 feet from it." "About that." "Well then, I will tell you what we must do. We must pierce through the corridor by forming a side opening about the middle, as it were the top part of a cross. This time you will lay your plans more accurately. We shall get out into the gallery you have described, kill the sentinel who guards it, and make our escape. All we require to ensure quick success is courage, and that you possess, and strength which I am not deficient in. As for patience, you have abundantly proved yours. You shall now see me prove mine." "One instant, my dear friend," replied the Abbé. "It is clear you do not understand the nature of the courage with which I am endowed, and what use I intend making of my strength. As for patience, I consider that I have abundantly exercised that in beginning every morning the task of the night before, and every night renewing the task of the day. But then, a young man, and I pray of you to give me your full attention, then I thought I could not be doing anything displeasing to the Almighty in trying to set an innocent being at liberty, one who had committed no offense, and merited not condemnation." "And have your notions changed?" asked Dante with much surprise. "Do you think yourself more guilty in making the attempt since you have encountered me?" "No, neither do I wish to incur guilt. Hitherto I have fancied myself merely waging war against circumstances, not men. I have thought it no sin to bore through a wall or destroy a staircase, but I cannot so easily persuade myself to pierce a heart or take away a life." A slight movement of surprise escaped Dante. "Is it possible," said he, "that where your liberty is at stake, you can allow any such scruple to deter you from obtaining it?" "Tell me," replied Faria, "what has hindered you from knocking down your jailer with a piece of wood torn from your bedstead, dressing yourself in his clothes, and endeavoring to escape?" "Simply the fact that the idea never occurred to me," answered Dante. "Because," said the old man, "the natural repugnance to the commission of such a crime prevented you from thinking of it. And so it ever is, because in simple and allowable things our natural instincts keep us from deviating from the strict line of duty. The tiger, whose nature teaches him to delight in shedding blood, needs but the sense of smell to show him when his prey is within his reach, and by following this instinct he is enabled to measure the leap necessary to permit him to spring on his victim. But man, on the contrary, loathes the idea of blood. It is not alone that the laws of social life inspire him with a shrinking dread of taking life. His natural construction and physiological formation." Dante was confused and silent at this explanation of the thoughts which had unconsciously been working in his mind. Or rather soul, for there are two distinct sorts of ideas, those that proceed from the head and those that emanate from the heart. "Since my imprisonment," said Faria, "I have thought over all the most celebrated cases of escape on record. They have rarely been as successful. Those that have been crowned with full success have been long meditated upon and carefully arranged, such, for instance, as the escape of the Duc de Beaufort from the Château de Vincennes, that of the Abbé de Beaucois from Fort-l'Évêque, of Latude from the Bastille. Then there are those for which chance sometimes affords the opportunity, and those are the best of all. Let us therefore wait patiently for some favorable moment, and when it presents itself,
profit by it.
Ah, said Dante.
You might well endure the tedious delay. You were constantly employed in the task you set yourself. And when weary with toil, you had your hopes to refresh and encourage you.
I assure you, replied the old man, I did not turn to that source for recreation or support.
What did you do then?
I wrote or studied.
Were you then permitted the use of pens, ink, and paper?
Oh, no, answered the abbé. I had none but what I made for myself.
You made paper, pens, and ink?
Yes.
Dante gazed with admiration, but he had some difficulty in believing. Faria saw this.
When you pay me a visit in my cell, my young friend, said he, I will show you an entire work, the fruits of the thoughts and the reflections of my whole life. Many of them meditated over in the shades of the Colosseum at Rome, at the foot of St. Mark's Column at Venice, and on the borders of the Arno at Florence, little imagining at the time that they would be arranged in order within the walls of the Chateau d'If. The work I speak of is called A Treatise on the Possibility of a General Monarchy in Italy, and will make one large quarto volume.
And on what have you written all this?
On 2 of my shirts. I invented a preparation that makes linen as smooth and as easy to write on as parchment.
You are then a chemist?
Somewhat. I know Lavoisier and was the intimate friend of Cabanilles.
But for such a work you must have needed books. Had you any?
I had nearly 5,000 volumes in my library at Rome, but after reading them over many times, I found out that with 150 well-chosen books, a man possesses, if not a complete summary of all human knowledge, at least all that a man would need really know. I devoted 3 years of my life to reading and studying these 150 volumes, till I knew them nearly by heart, so that since I have been in prison, a very slight effort of memory has enabled me to recall their contents as readily as though the pages were open before me. I could recite you the whole of Thucydides, Xenophon, Plutarch, Titus, Livius, Tacitus, Strada, Jonandes, Dante, Montaigne, Shakespeare, Spinoza, Machiavelli, and Bossuet. I name only the most important.
You are doubtless acquainted with a variety of languages, so as to have been able to read all these.
Yes, I speak 5 of the modern tongues. That is to say, German, French, Italian, English, and Spanish. By the aid of ancient Greek, I learned modern Greek. I don't speak it so well as I could wish, but I am still trying to improve myself.
Improve yourself, repeated Dante. Why, how can you manage to do so?
Why, I made a vocabulary of the words I knew, turned, returned, and arranged them, so as to enable me to express my thoughts through their medium. I know nearly 1,000 words, which is all that is absolutely necessary, although I believe there are nearly 100,000 in the dictionaries. I cannot hope to be very fluent, but I certainly should have no difficulty in explaining my wants and wishes, and that would be quite as much as I should ever require.
Stronger grew the wonder of Dante, who almost fancied it had to do with one gifted with supernatural powers. Still hoping to find some imperfection which might bring him down to a level with human beings, he added,
Then, if you were not furnished with pens, how did you manage to write the word you speak of? I made some excellent ones, which would be universally preferred to all others if once known. You are aware what huge whitings are served us on maigre days. Well, I selected the cartilages of the heads of these fishes, and you can scarcely imagine the delight with which I welcome the arrival of each Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday, as affording me the means of increasing my stock of pens. For I will freely confess that my historical labors have been my greatest solace and relief. While retracing the past, I forgot the present, and traversing at will the path of history, I cease to remember that I am myself a prisoner. But the ink, said Dante, of what did you make your ink? There was formerly a fireplace in my dungeon, replied Faria, but it was closed up long ere I became an occupant of this prison. Still, it must have been many years in use, for it was thickly covered with a coating of soot. This soot I dissolved in a portion of the wine brought to me every Sunday, and I assure you, a better ink cannot be desired. For very important notes, for which closer attention is required, I pricked one of my fingers and wrote with my own blood. And when? Asked Dante. May I see all this? Whenever you please, replied the abbé. Oh, then let it me directly, exclaimed the young man. Follow me, then, said the abbé, as he re-entered the subterranean passage, in which he soon disappeared, followed by Dante. End of chapter 16.
Chapter 17 of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 17. The Abbé's Chamber. After having passed with tolerable ease through the subterranean passage, which, however, did not admit that they are holding themselves erect, the two friends reached the further end of the corridor, into which the Abbé's cell opened. From that point, the passage became much narrower, and barely permitted one to creep through on hands and knees. The floor of the Abbé's cell was paved, and it had been by raising one of the stones in the most obscure corner that Faria had to be able to commence the laborious task of which Dante had witnessed the completion. As he entered the chamber of his friend, Dante cast around one eager and searching glance in quest of the expected marvels, but nothing more than common met his view. It is well, said the abbé. We have some hours before us. It is now just 12 o'clock. Instinctively, Dante turned round to observe by what watch or clock the abbé had been able so accurately to specify the hour. Look at this ray of light which enters by my window, said the abbé, and then observe the lines traced on the wall. Well, by means of these lines, which are in accordance with the double motion of the earth, and the ellipse it describes around the sun, I am enabled to ascertain the precise hour with more minuteness than if I possessed a watch, for that might be broken or deranged in its movements, while the sun and the earth never vary in their appointed paths. This last explanation was wholly lost upon Dante, who had always imagined from seeing the sun rise from behind the mountains and set in the Mediterranean that it moved, and not the earth. A double movement of the globe he inhabited, and of which he could feel nothing, appeared to him perfectly impossible. Each word that fell from his companion's lips seemed fraught with the mysteries of science, as worthy of digging out as of the gold and diamonds in the mines of Guzarat and Golconda, which he could just recollect having visited during a voyage made in his earliest youth. Come, said he to the abbé, I am anxious to see your treasures. The abbé smiled, and proceeding to the disused fireplace, raised by the help of his chisel a long stone, which had doubtless been the hearth, beneath which was a cavity of considerable depth, serving as a safe depository of the articles mentioned to Dante. What do you wish to see first? Asked the abbé. Oh, your great work on the monarchy of Italy. Faria then drew forth from his hiding place 3 or 4 rolls of linen, laid one over the other like folds of papyrus. These rolls consisted of slips of cloth about 4 inches wide and 18 long. They were all carefully numbered and closely covered with writing, so legible that Dante could easily read it, as well as make out the sense, it being in Italian, a language he, as a Provençal, perfectly understood. There, said he, there is the work complete. I wrote the word finis at the end of the 68th strip about a week ago. I have torn up 2 of my shirts, and as many handkerchiefs as I was master of,
to complete the precious pages. Should I ever get out of prison and find in all Italy a printer courageous enough to publish what I have composed, my literary reputation is forever secured." "I see," answered Dante. "Now let me behold the curious pens with which you have written your work." "Look," said Faria, showing to the young man a slender stick about 6 inches long, and much resembling the size of the handle of a fine painting brush, to the end of which was tied by a piece of thread one of those cartilages of which the abbé had before spoken to Dante. It was pointed, and divided at the nib like an ordinary pen. Dante examined it with intense admiration, then looked around to see the instrument with which it had been shaped so correctly into form. "Ah, yes," said Faria. "The penknife, that's my masterpiece. I made it as well, this larger knife, out of an old iron candlestick." The penknife was sharp and keen as a razor. As for the other knife, it would serve a double purpose, and with it one cut and thrust. Dante examined the various articles shown to him with the same attention that he had bestowed on the curiosities and strange tools exhibited in the shops at Marseille as the works of the savages in the South Seas, from whence they had been brought by the different trading vessels. "As for the ink," said Faria, "I told you I managed to obtain that, and I only just made it from time to time as I require it." "One thing still puzzles me," observed Dante, "and that is how you managed to do all this by daylight." "I worked at night also," replied Faria. "Night? Why, for heaven's sake, are your eyes like cats, that you can see to work in the dark?" "Indeed they are not, but God has supplied man with the intelligence that enables him to overcome the limitations of natural conditions. I furnish myself with a light." "You did? Pray, tell me how." "I separated the fat from the meat served to me, melted it, and so made oil. Here is my lamp." So saying, the abbé exhibited a sort of torch, very similar to those used in public illuminations. "But a light. Here are 2 flints and a piece of burnt linen." "And matches?" "I pretended that I had a disorder of the skin, and asked for a little sulphur, which was readily supplied." Dante laid the different things he had been looking at on the table, and stood with his head drooping on his breast, as though overwhelmed by the perseverance and strength of Faria's mind. "You have not seen all yet," continued Faria, "for I do not think it wise to trust all my treasures in the same hiding place. Let us shut this one up." They put the stone back in its place. The abbé sprinkled a little dust over it to conceal the traces of its having been removed, rubbed his foot well on it to make it assume the same appearance as the other, and then, going towards his bed, he removed it from the spot it stood in. Behind the head of the bed, and concealed by a stone fitting in so closely as to defy all suspicion, was a hollow space, and in this space a ladder of cords between 25 and 38 feet in length. Dante closely and eagerly examined it. He found it firm, solid, and compact enough to bear any weight. "Who supplied you with the materials for making this wonderful work?" "I tore up several of my shirts and ripped out the seams in the sheets of my bed during my 3 years' imprisonment at Fenestrelle, and when I was removed to the Chateau d'If, I managed to bring the ravelings with me so that I have been able to finish my work here." "And was it not discovered that your sheets were unhemmed?" "Oh no, for when I had taken out the thread I required, I hemmed the edges over again." "With what?" "With this needle," said the abbé, as opening his ragged vestments he showed Dante a long, sharp fishbone with a small perforated eye for the thread, a small portion of which still remained in it. "I once thought," continued Faria, "of removing these iron bars and letting myself down from the window, which, as you see, is somewhat wider than yours, although I should have enlarged it still more, preparatory to my flight. However, I discovered that I should merely have dropped into a sort of inner court, and I therefore renounced the project altogether as too full of risk and danger." Nevertheless, I carefully preserved my ladder against one of those unforeseen opportunities of which I spoke just now, and which sudden chance frequently brings about. While affecting to be deeply engaged in examining the ladder, the mind of Dante was in fact busily occupied by the idea that a person so intelligent, ingenious and clear-sighted as the Abbé might probably be able to solve the dark mystery of his own misfortunes, where he himself could see nothing. "What are you thinking of?" asked the Abbé smilingly, imputing the deep abstraction in which his visitors plunged to the excess of his awe and wonder. "I was reflecting in the first place," replied Dante, "upon the enormous degree of intelligence and ability you must have employed to reach the high perfection to which you have attained. What would you not have accomplished if you had been free?" "Possibly nothing at all. The overflow of my brain would probably, in a state of freedom, have evaporated in 1,000 follies. Misfortune is needed to bring to light the treasures of the human intellect. Compression is needed to explode gunpowder. Captivity has brought my mental faculties to a focus, and you are well aware that from the collision of clouds electricity is produced, from electricity lightning, from lightning illumination." "No," replied Dante, "I know nothing. Some of your words are to me quite empty of meaning. You must be blessed indeed to possess the knowledge you have." The Abbé smiled. "Well, said he, but you had another subject for your thoughts. Did you not say so just now?" "I did." "You have told me as yet but one of them. Let me hear the other." "It was this, that while you had related to me all the particulars of your past life, you were perfectly unacquainted with mine." "Your life, my young friend, has not been of sufficient length to admit of your having passed through any very important events." "It has been long enough to inflict on me a great and undeserved misfortune. I would fain fix the source of it on man, that I may no longer vent reproaches upon heaven." "Then you profess ignorance of the crime with which you are charged?" "I do indeed, and this I swear by the two beings most dear to me upon earth, my father and Mercedes." "Come," said the Abbé, closing his hiding place and pushing the bed back to its original situation, "let me hear your story." Dante obeyed and commenced what he called his history, but which consisted only of the account of a voyage to India and 2 or 3 voyages to the Levant, until he arrived at the recital of his last cruise, with the death of Captain Leclerc and the receipt of a packet to be delivered by himself to the Grand Marshal, his interview with that personage, and his receiving, in place of the packet brought, a letter addressed to a Monsieur Noirtier, his arrival at Marseille and interview with his father, his affection for Mercedes and their nuptial feast, his arrest and subsequent examination, his temporary detention at the Palais de Justice, and his final imprisonment in the Château d'If. From this point everything was a blank to Dante. He knew nothing more, not even the length of time he had been imprisoned. His recital finished, the Abbé reflected long and earnestly. "There is," said he at the end of his meditations, "a clever maxim, which bears upon what I was saying to you some little while ago, and that is that unless wicked ideas take root in a naturally depraved mind, human nature in a right and wholesome state revolts at crime. Still, from an artificial civilization have originated wants, vices, and false tastes, which occasionally become so powerful as to stifle within us all good feelings, and ultimately to lead us into guilt and wickedness. From this view of things, then comes the axiom that if you visit to discover the author of any bad action, seek first to discover the person to whom the perpetration of that bad action could be in any way advantageous. And now to apply it in your case, to whom could your disappearance have been serviceable? To no one, by heaven. I was a very insignificant person. Do not speak thus, for your reply evinces neither logic nor philosophy. Everything is relative, my dear young friend, from the king who stands in the way of his successor to the employee who keeps his rival out of a place. Now, in the event of the king's death, his successor inherits a crown. When the employee dies, the supernumerary steps into his shoes and receives a salary of 12,000 livres. Well, these 12,000 livres are his civil list, and are as essential to him as the 12 millions of a king. Everyone, from the highest to the lowest degree, has his place on the social ladder, and is beset by stormy passions and conflicting interests, as in Descartes' theory of pressure and impulsion. But these forces increase as we go higher, so that we have a spiral which, in defiance of reason, rests upon the apex and not on the base. Now let us return to your particular world. You say you were on the point of being made a captain of the Pharaoh. Yes. And about to become the husband of a young and lovely girl. Yes. Now, could anyone have had any interest in preventing the accomplishment of these two things? But let us first settle the question as to its being the interest of anyone to hinder you from being captain of the Pharaoh. What say you? I cannot believe such was the case. I was generally liked on board, and that the sailors possessed the right of selecting a captain themselves, I feel convinced their choice would have fallen on me. There was only one person among the crew who had any feeling of ill will towards me. I had quarreled with him some time previously, and had even challenged him to fight me, but he refused. Now we are getting on. And what was this man's name? Danglars. What rank did he hold on board? He was supercargo. And had you been a captain, should you have retained him in his employment? Not if the choice had remained with me, for I had frequently observed inaccuracies in his accounts. Good again. Now then tell me, was any person present during your last conversation with Captain Leclerc? No, we were quite alone. Could your conversation have been overheard by anyone? It might, for the cabin door was open. And stay, now, I recollect. Danglars himself passed by just as Captain Leclerc was giving me the packet for the Grand Marshal. That's better, cried the Abbé. Now we are on the right ascent. Did you take anybody with you when you put into the port of Elba? Nobody. Somebody there received your packet and gave you a letter in place of it, I think. Yes, the Grand Marshal did. And what did you do with that letter? Put it into my portfolio. You had your portfolio with you then? Now, how could a sailor find room in his pocket for a portfolio large enough to contain an official letter? You are right, it was left on board. Then it was not until your return to the ship that you put the letter in the portfolio? No. And what did you do with this same letter while returning from the Porto Ferraio to the vessel? I carried it in my hand, so that when you went on board the Pharaoh, everybody could see that you held a letter in your hand. Yes, Danglars as well as the rest. Danglars as well as others. Now listen to me, and try to recall every circumstance attending your arrest. Do you recollect the words in which the information against you was formulated? Oh yes, I read it over 3 times, and the words sank deeply into my memory. Repeat it to me. Dante paused a moment, then said, "This is it, word for word. The king's attorney is informed by a friend to the throne and religion that one Edmond Dante, mate on board the Pharaoh, this day arrived from Smyrna, after having touched at Naples and Porto Ferraio, has been entrusted by Murat with a packet for the usurper, again by the usurper, with a letter for the Bonapartist Club in Paris. This proof of his guilt may be procured by his immediate arrest, as the letter will be found either about his person, at his father's residence, or in his cabin on board the Pharaoh.
The Abbé shrugged his shoulders.
The thing is clear as day, said he. And you must have had a very confiding nature, as well as a good heart, not to have suspected the origin of the whole affair.
Do you really think so? Ah, that would indeed be infamous.
How did Danglars usually write? In a handsome running hand. And how was the anonymous letter written? Backhanded.
Again, the Abbé smiled.
Disguised?
It was very boldly written, if disguised.
Stop a bit,
said the Abbé, taking out what he called his pen, and after dipping it into the ink, he wrote on a piece of prepared linen with his left hand the first 2 or 3 words of the accusation. Dante drew back and gazed on the Abbé with sensation almost amounting to terror.
How very astonishing, cried he at length. Why, your writing exactly resembles that of the accusation. Simply because that accusation had been written with the left hand. And I have noticed that...
What?
That while the writing of different persons done with the right hand varies, that performed with the left hand is invariably uniform. You have evidently seen and observed everything. Let us proceed.
Oh, yes, yes.
Now, as regards the second question, I am listening. Was there any person whose interest it was to prevent your marriage with Mercedes?
Yes, a young man who loved her.
And his name was?
Fernand.
This is a Spanish name, I think.
He was a Catalan.
You imagine him capable of writing the letter?
Oh no, he would more likely have got rid of me by sticking a knife into me.
That is in a strict accordance with the Spanish character. An assassination they will unhesitatingly commit, but an act of cowardice, never.
Besides, said Dante,
the various circumstances mentioned in the letter were wholly unknown to him. You had never spoken of them yourself to anyone?
To no one.
Not even to your mistress?
No, not even to my betrothed.
Then it is a Danglars.
I feel quite sure of it now.
Wait a little. Pray, was Danglars acquainted with Fernand?
No. Yes, he was. Now I recollect.
What?
To have seen them both sitting at table together under an arbor at Père Pamphil's the evening before the day fixed for my wedding. They were in earnest conversation. Danglars was joking in a friendly way, but Fernand looked pale and agitated.
Were they alone?
There was a third person with them, whom I knew perfectly well, and who had in all probability made their acquaintance. He was a tailor named Caderousse, but he was very drunk. Stay, how strange, that it should not have occurred to me before. Now I remember quite well that on the table round which they were sitting were pens, ink, and paper. Oh, the heartless, treacherous scoundrels! Exclaimed Dante, pressing his hand to his throbbing brows.
Is there anything else I can assist you in discovering, besides the villainy of your friends? Inquired the Abbé with a laugh.
Yes, replied Dante eagerly. I would beg of you, who see so completely to the depths of things, and to whom the greatest mystery seems but an easy riddle, to explain to me how it was that I underwent no second examination, was never brought to trial, and above all, was condemned without ever having had sentence passed on me.
That is altogether a different and more serious matter, responded the Abbé. The ways of justice are frequently too dark and mysterious to be easily penetrated. All we have hitherto done in the matter has been child's play. If you wish me to enter upon the more difficult part of the business, you must assist me by the most minute information on every point.
Pray ask me whatever question you please, for in good truth you see more clearly into my life than I do myself.
In the first place, then who examined you? The king's attorney, his deputy, or a magistrate?
The deputy.
Was he young or older? About 6 or 27 years of age, I should say. So, answered the Abbé, old enough to be ambitious, but too young to be corrupt. And how did he treat you? With more of mildness than severity. Did you tell him your whole story? I did. And did his conduct change at all in the course of your examination? He did appear much disturbed when he read the letter that had brought me into this scrape. He seemed quite overcome by my misfortune. By your misfortune? Yes. Then you feel quite sure that it was the misfortune he deplored. He gave me one great proof of his sympathy at any rate. And that? He burnt the sole evidence that could at all have criminated me. What? The accusation? No, the letter. Are you sure? I saw it done. That alters the case. This man might after all be a great scoundrel than you have thought possible. Upon my word, said Dante, you make me shudder. Is the world filled with tigers and crocodiles? Yes, and remember that two-legged tigers and crocodiles are more dangerous than the others. Never mind. Let us go on. With all my heart. You tell me he burned the letter. He did, saying at the same time, you see, I thus destroy the only proof existing against you. This action is somewhat too sublime to be natural. You think so? I am sure of it. To whom was this letter addressed? To Monsieur Noirtier, numéro 13, Coqueron, Paris. Now can you conceive of any interest that your heroic deputy could possibly have had in the destruction of that letter? Why, it is not altogether impossible. He might have had, for he made me promise several times never to speak of that letter to anyone, assuring me he so advised me for my own interest. And more than this, he insisted on my taking a solemn oath never to utter the name mentioned in the address. Noirtier, repeated the Abbé. Noirtier. I knew a person of that name at the court of the Queen of Etruria, a Noirtier, who had been a Girondin during the Revolution. What was your deputy called? De Villefort. The Abbé burst into a fit of laughter, while Dante gazed on him in utter astonishment. What ails you? Said he at length. Do you see that ray of sunlight? I do. Well, the whole thing is more clear to me than that sunbeam is to you. Poor fellow, poor young man. And you tell me this magistrate expressed great sympathy and commiseration for you. He did. And the worthy man destroyed your compromising letter? Yes. And then made you swear never to utter the name of Noirtier? Yes. Why, you poor short-sighted simpleton, can you not guess who this Noirtier was, whose very name he was so careful to keep concealed? Noirtier was his father! Had a thunderbolt fallen at the feet of Dante, or hell opened its yawning gulf before him, he could not have been more completely transfixed with horror than he was at the sound of these unexpected words. Starting up, he clasped his hands around his head as though to prevent his very brain from bursting, and exclaimed, His father? His father? Yes, his father, replied the Abbé. His right name was Noirtier de Villefort. At this instant, a bright light shot through the mind of Dante, and cleared up all that had been dark and obscure before. The change that had come over Villefort during the examination, the destruction of the letter, the exacted promise, the almost supplicating tones of the magistrate who seemed rather to implore mercy than to pronounce punishment, all returned with a stunning force to his memory. He cried out and staggered against the wall like a drunken man. Then he hurried to the opening that led from the Abbé's cell to his own and said, I must be alone to think over all this. When he regained his dungeon, he threw himself on his bed, where the turnkey found him in the evening visit,
sitting with fixed gaze and contracted features, dumb and motionless as a statue. During these hours of profound meditation, which to him had seemed only minutes, he had formed a fearful resolution and bound himself to its fulfillment by a solemn oath. Dante was at length roused from his reverie by the voice of Faria, who, having also been visited by his jailer, had come to invite his fellow sufferer to share his supper. The reputation of being out of his mind, though harmlessly and even amusingly so, had procured for the abbé unusual privileges. He was supplied with bread of a finer, whiter quality than the usual prison fare, and even regaled each Sunday with a small quantity of wine. Now this was a Sunday, and the abbé had come to ask his young companion to share the luxuries with him. Dante followed. His features were no longer contracted, and now wore their usual expression, but there was that in his whole appearance that bespoke one who had come to a fixed and desperate resolve. Faria bent on him his penetrating eye. "I regret now," said he, "having helped you in your late inquiries, or having given you the information I did." "Why so?" inquired Dante. "Because it has instilled a new passion in your heart, that of vengeance." Dante smiled. "Let us talk of something else," said he. Again, the abbé looked at him, then mournfully shook his head, but in accordance with Dante's request, he began to speak of other matters. The elder prisoner was one of those persons whose conversation, like that of all who had experienced many trials, contained many useful and important hints, as well as sound information. But it was never egotistical, for that unfortunate man never alluded to his own sorrows. Dante listened with admiring attention to all he said. Some of his remarks corresponded with what he already knew, or applied to the sort of knowledge his nautical life had enabled him to acquire. A part of the good abbé's words, however, were wholly incomprehensible to him, but like the aurora which guides the navigator in northern latitudes, opened new vistas to the inquiring mind of the listener, and gave fantastic glimpses of new horizons, enabling him justly to estimate the delight an intellectual mind would have in following one so richly gifted as Faria along the heights of truth, where he was so much at home. "You must teach me a small part of what you know," said Dante, "if only to prevent your growing weary of me. I can well believe that so learned a person as yourself would prefer absolute solitude to being tormented with the company of one as ignorant and uninformed as myself. If you will only agree to my request, I promise you never to mention another word about escaping." The abbé smiled. "Alas, my boy," said he, "human knowledge is confined within very narrow limits, and when I have taught you mathematics, physics, history, and the 3 or 4 modern languages with which I am acquainted, you will know as much as I do myself. Now it will scarcely require 2 years for me to communicate to you the stock of learning I possess." "2 years?" exclaimed Dante. "Do you really believe I can acquire all these things in so short a time?" "Not their application, certainly, but their principles you may. To learn is not to know. There are the learners and the learned. Memory makes the one, philosophy the other." "But cannot one learn philosophy?" "Philosophy cannot be taught. It is the application of the sciences to truth. It is like the golden cloud in which the Messiah went up into heaven." "Well then," said Dante, "what shall you teach me first? I am in a hurry to begin. I want to learn." "Everything," said the abbé. And that very evening, the prisoners sketched a plan of education to be entered upon the following day. Dante possessed a prodigious memory, combined with an astonishing quickness and readiness of conception. The mathematical turn of his mind rendered him apt at all kinds of calculation, while his naturally poetical feelings threw a light and pleasing veil over the dry reality of arithmetical computation, or the rigid severity of geometry. He already knew Italian, and had also picked up a little of the Romaic dialect during voyages to the east, and by the aid of these two languages he easily comprehended the construction of all the others, so that at the end of 6 months he began to speak Spanish, English, and German. In strict accordance with the promise made to the Abbé, Dante spoke no more of escape. Perhaps the delight his studies afforded him left no room for such thoughts. Perhaps the recollection that he had pledged his word, on which his sense of honour was keen, kept him from referring in any way to the possibilities of flight. Days, even months, passed by unheeded in one rapid and instructive course. At the end of a year, Dante was a new man. Dante observed, however, that Faria, in spite of the relief his society afforded, daily grew sadder. One thought seemed incessantly to harass and distract his mind. Sometimes he would fall into long reverie, sigh heavily and involuntarily, then suddenly rise, and with folded arms begin pacing the confined space of his dungeon. One day he stopped all at once and exclaimed, if there were no scent, there shall not be one a minute longer than you please, said Dante, who had followed the working of his thoughts as accurately as though his brain were enclosed in crystal so clear as to display its minutest operations. I have already told you, answered the Abbé, that I loathe the idea of shedding blood. And yet the murder, if you choose to call it so, would be simply a measure of self-preservation. No matter, I could never agree to it. Still, you have thought of it. Incessantly, alas, cried the Abbé. And you have discovered a means of regaining our freedom, have you not? Asked Dante eagerly. I have, if it were only possible to place a deaf and blind sentinel in the gallery beyond us. He shall be both blind and deaf, replied the young man with an air of determination that made his companion shudder. No, no, cried the Abbé. Impossible. Dante endeavoured to renew the subject. The Abbé shook his head in token of disapproval and refused to make any further response. 3 months passed away. Are you strong? The Abbé asked one day of Dante. The young man in reply took up the chisel, bent it to the form of a horseshoe, and then as readily straightened it. And you will engage not to do any harm to the sentry, except as a last resort? I promise, on my honor. Then, said the Abbé, we may hope to put our design into execution. And how long shall we be in accomplishing the necessary work? At least a year. And shall we begin at once? At once. We have lost a year to no purpose, cried Dante. Do you consider the last 12 months to have been wasted? Asked the Abbé. Forgive me, cried Edmund, blushing deeply. Tut, tut, answered the Abbé. Man is but a man after all, and you are about the best specimen of the genus I have ever known. Come, let me show you my plan. The Abbé then showed Dante the sketch he had made for their escape. It consisted of a plan of his own cell and that of Dante with the passage which united them. In this passage he proposed to drive a level as they do in mines. This level would bring the two prisoners immediately beneath the gallery, where the sentry kept watch. Once there, a large excavation would be made, and one of the flagstones with which the gallery was paved be so completely loosened that at the desired moment it would give way beneath the feet of the soldier, who, stunned by his fall, would be immediately bound and gagged by Dante before he had power to offer any resistance. The prisoners were then to make their way through one of the gallery windows and to let themselves down from the outer walls by means of the Abbé's ladder of cords. Dante's eyes sparkled with joy, and he rubbed his hands with delight at the idea of a plan so simple, yet apparently so certain to succeed. That very day the miners began their labours with a vigour and alacrity proportional to their long rest from fatigue and their hopes of ultimate success. Nothing interrupted the progress of the work, except the necessity that each was under of returning to his cell in anticipation of the turnkey's visits. They had learned to distinguish the almost imperceptible sound of his footsteps as he descended towards their dungeons, and happily never failed of being prepared for his coming. The fresh earth excavated during their present work, and which would have entirely blocked up the old passage, was thrown by degrees and with the utmost precaution out of the window in either Faria's or Dante's cell, the rubbish being first pulverized so finely that the night wind carried it far away without permitting the smallest trace to remain. More than a year had been consumed in this undertaking, the only tools for which had been a chisel, a knife, and a wooden lever. Faria still continued to instruct Dante by conversing with him, sometimes in one language, sometimes in another, at others relating to him the history of nations and great men who from time to time have risen to fame and trodden the path of glory. The Abbé was a man of the world, and had, moreover, mixed in the first society of the day. He wore an air of melancholy dignity which Dante, thanks to the imitative powers bestowed on him by nature, easily acquired, as well as that outward polish and politeness he had before been wanting in, and which is seldom possessed except by those who have been placed in constant intercourse with persons of high birth and breeding. At the end of 15 months, the level was finished, and the excavation completed beneath the gallery, and the two workmen could distinctly hear the measured tread of the sentinel as he paced to and fro over their heads. Compelled as they were to await a night sufficiently dark to favour their flight, they were obliged to defer their final attempt until that auspicious moment should arrive. Their greatest dread now was lest the stone through which the sentry was doomed to fall should give way before its right time. And this they had in some measure provided against by propping it up with a small beam which they had discovered in the walls through which they had worked their way. Dante was occupied in arranging this piece of wood when he heard Faria, who had remained in Edmond's cell for the purpose of cutting a peg to secure their rope ladder, call to him in a tone indicative of great suffering. Dante hastened to his dungeon, where he found him standing in the middle of the room, pale as death, his forehead streaming with perspiration, and his hands clinched tightly together. "Gracious heavens!" exclaimed Dante. "What is the matter? What has happened?" "Quick, quick!" returned the Abbé. "Listen to what I have to say." Dante looked in fear and wonder at the livid countenance of Faria, whose eyes, already dull and sunken, were surrounded by purple circles, while his lips were white as those of a corpse, and his very hair seemed to stand on end. "Tell me, I beseech you, what ails you?" cried Dante, letting his chisel fall to the floor. "Alas," faltered the Abbé, "all is over with me. I am seized with a terrible, perhaps mortal illness. I can feel that the paroxysm is fast approaching. I had a similar attack the year previous to my imprisonment. This malady admits but of one remedy. I will tell you what it is. Go into my cell as quickly as you can. Draw out one of the feet that support the bed. You will find it has been hollowed out for the purpose of containing a small phial. You will see they are filled with a red-looking fluid. Bring it to me, or rather, no, I may be found here. Therefore, help me back to my room while I have the strength to drag myself along. Who knows what may happen, or how long the attack may last." In spite of the magnitude of the misfortune which thus suddenly frustrated his hopes, Dante did not lose his presence of mind, but descended into the passage, dragging his unfortunate companion with him. Then, half carrying, half supporting him, he managed to reach the Abbé's chamber, when he immediately laid the sufferer on his bed. "Thanks," said the poor Abbé, shivering as though his veins were filled with ice. "I am about to be seized with a fit of catalepsy, and when it comes to its height, I shall probably lie still and motionless as though dead, uttering neither sigh nor groan. On the other hand, the symptoms may be much more violent, and cause me to fall into fearful convulsions, foam at the mouth, and cry out loudly.
Take care my cries are not heard, for if they are, it is more than probable I shall be removed to another part of the prison, and we be separated forever. When I become quite motionless, cold, and rigid as a corpse, then, and not before, be careful about this. Force open my teeth with a knife. Pour from 8 to 10 drops of the liquor contained in the phial down my throat, and I may perhaps revive.
Perhaps, exclaimed Dante in grief-stricken tones.
Help! Help!
Cried the abbé.
I die!
So sudden and violent was the fit that the unfortunate prisoner was unable to complete the sentence. A violent convulsion shook his whole frame. His eyes started from their sockets. His mouth was drawn on one side. His cheeks became purple. He struggled, foamed, dashed himself about, and uttered the most dreadful cries, which, however, Dante prevented from being heard by covering his head with the blanket. The fit lasted 2 hours. Then, more helpless than an infant, and colder and paler than marble, more crushed and broken than a reed trampled underfoot, he fell back, doubled up in one last convulsion, and became as rigid as a corpse. Edmond waited till life seemed extinct in the body of his friend. Then, taking up the knife, he with difficulty forced open the closely fixed jaws, carefully administered the appointed number of drops, and anxiously awaited the result. An hour passed away, and the old man gave no sign of returning animation. Dante began to fear he had delayed too long ere he had administered the remedy, and thrusting his hands into his hair, continued gazing on the lifeless features of his friend. At length, a slight colour tinged the livid cheeks. Consciousness returned to the dull, open eyeballs. A faint sigh issued from the lips, and the sufferer made a feeble effort to move.
He is saved! He is saved!
Cried Dante in a paroxysm of delight. The sick man was not yet able to speak, but he pointed with evident anxiety towards the door. Dante listened and plainly distinguished the approaching steps of the jailer. It was therefore near 7 o'clock. Edmond's anxiety had put all thoughts of time out of his head. The young man sprang to the entrance, darted through it, carefully drawing the stone over the opening, and hurried to his cell. He had scarcely done so before the door opened, and the jailer saw the prisoner seated as usual on the side of his bed. Almost before the key had turned in the lock, and before the departing steps of the jailer had died away in the long corridor, he had to traverse Dante, whose restless anxiety concerning his friend left him no desire to touch the food brought to him, hurried back to the abbé's chamber, and raising the stone by pressing his head against it, was soon beside the sick man's couch. Faria had now fully regained his consciousness, but he still lay helpless and exhausted.
I did not expect to see you again,
said he feebly to Dante.
And why not?
Asked the young man.
Did you fancy yourself dying? No, I had no such idea. But knowing that all was ready for flight, I thought you might have made your escape.
The deep glow of indignation suffused the cheeks of Dante.
Without you? Did you really think me capable of that? At least, said the abbé, I now see how wrong such an opinion would have been. Alas, alas, I am fearfully exhausted and debilitated by this attack. Be of good cheer, replied Dante. Your strength will return.
And as he spoke, he seated himself near the bed beside Faria and took his hands. The abbé shook his head.
The last attack I had, said he, lasted but half an hour, and after it I was hungry and got up without help. Now I can move neither my right arm nor leg, and my head seems uncomfortable, which shows that there has been a suffusion of blood on the brain. The third attack will either carry me off or leave me paralyzed for life. No, no, cried Dante. You are mistaken. You will not die. And your third attack, if indeed you should have another, will find you at liberty. We shall save you another time, as we have done this. only with a better chance of success, because we shall be able to command every requisite assistance. My good Edmond, answered the Abbé, be not deceived. The attack which has just passed away condemns me forever to the walls of a prison. None can fly from a dungeon who cannot walk. Well, we will wait a week, a month, 2 months if need be, and meanwhile your strength will return. Everything is in readiness for our flight, and we can select any time we choose. As soon as you feel able to swim, we will go. I shall never swim again, replied Faria. This arm is paralyzed, not for a time, but forever. Lift it and judge if I am mistaken. The young man raised the arm, which fell back by its own weight, perfectly inanimate and helpless. A sigh escaped him. You are convinced now, Edmond, are you not? Asked the Abbé. Depend upon it. I know what I say. Since the first attack I experienced of this malady, I have continually reflected on it. Indeed, I expected it, for it is a family inheritance. Both my father and grandfather died of it in a third attack. The physician, who prepared me for the remedy I have twice successfully taken, was no other than the celebrated Cabanilles, and he predicted a similar end for me. The physician may be mistaken, exclaimed Dante. And as for your poor arm, what difference will that make? I can take you on my shoulders and swim for both of us. My son, said the Abbé, you, who are a sailor and a swimmer, must know as well as I do that a man so loaded would sink before he had done 50 strokes. Cease then to allow yourself to be duped by vain hopes that even your own excellent heart refuses to believe in. Here I shall remain till the hour of my deliverance arrives, and that in all human probability will be the hour of my death. As for you, who are young and active, delay not on my account, but fly, go. I give you back your promise. It is well, said Dante. Then I shall also remain. Then rising and extending his hand with an air of solemnity over the old man's head, he slowly added, by the blood of Christ, I swear never to leave you while you live. Faria gazed fondly on his noble-minded, single-hearted, high-principled young friend, and read in his countenance ample confirmation of the sincerity of his devotion and the loyalty of his purpose. Thanks, murmured the invalid, extending one hand. I accept. You may one of these days reap the reward of your disinterested devotion, but as I cannot, and you will not quit this place, it becomes necessary to fill up the excavation beneath the soldier's gallery. He might, by chance, hear the hollow sound of his footsteps, and call the attention of his officer to the circumstance. That would bring about a discovery which would inevitably lead to our being separated. Go then, and set about this work in which, unhappily, I can offer you no assistance. Keep at it all night, if necessary, and do not return here tomorrow till after the jailer has visited me. I shall have something of the greatest importance to communicate to you. Dante took the hand of the Abbé in his, and affectionately pressed it. Faria smiled encouragingly on him, and the young man retired to his task in the spirit of obedience and respect which he had sworn to show towards his aged friend. End of chapter 17.
Chapter 18 of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 18. The Treasure. When Dante returned next morning to the chamber of his companion in captivity, he found Faria seated and looking composed. In the ray of light which entered by the narrow window of his cell, he held open in his left hand, of which alone it will be recollected he retained the use, a sheet of paper which, from being constantly rolled into a small compass, had the form of a cylinder and was not easily kept open. He did not speak, but showed the paper to Dante. "What is that?" he inquired. "Look at it," said the abbé with a smile. "I have looked at it with all possible attention," said Dante, "and I only see half-burnt paper on which are traces of Gothic characters inscribed with a peculiar kind of ink." "This paper, my friend," said Faria, "I may now avow to you, since I have the proof of your fidelity. This paper is my treasure, of which from this day forth, 1/2 belongs to you." The sweat started forth on Dante's brow. Until this day, and for how long a time, he had refrained from talking of the treasure which he had brought upon the abbé the accusation of madness. With his instinctive delicacy, Edmond had preferred avoiding any touch on this painful chord, and Faria had been equally silent. He'd taken the silence of the old man for a return to reason, and now these few words uttered by Faria after so painful a crisis seemed to indicate a serious relapse into mental alienation. "Your treasure," stammered Dante. Faria smiled. "Yes," said he, "you have indeed a noble nature, Edmond, and I see by your paleness and agitation what is passing in your heart at this moment. No, be assured, I am not mad. This treasure exists, Dante, and if I have not been allowed to possess it, you will. Yes, you. No one would listen or believe me because everyone thought me mad. But you must know that I am not. Listen to me and believe me so afterwards, if you will." "Alas," murmured Edmond to himself, "this is a terrible relapse. There was only this blow wanting." Then he said aloud, "My dear friend, your attack has perhaps fatigued you. Had you not better repose a while? Tomorrow, if you will, I will hear your narrative, but today I wish to nurse you carefully. Besides," he said, "a treasure is not a thing we need hurry about." "On the contrary, it is a matter of the utmost importance, Edmond," replied the old man. "Who knows if tomorrow, or the next day after, the third attack may not come on, and then must not all be over? Yes, indeed, I have often thought with a bitter joy that these riches which would make the wealth of a dozen families will be forever lost to those men who persecute me. This idea was one of vengeance to me, and I tasted it slowly in the night of my dungeon and the despair of my captivity. But now I have forgiven the world for the love of you. Now that I see you, young and with a promising future, now that I think of all that may result to you in the good fortune of such a disclosure, I shudder at any delay, and tremble lest I should not assure to one as worthy as yourself the possession of so vast an amount of hidden wealth." Edmond turned away his head with a sigh. "You persist in your incredulity, Edmond," continued Faria. "My words have not convinced you. I see you require proofs. Well then, read this paper, which I have never shown to anyone." "Tomorrow, my dear friend," said Edmond, desirous of not yielding to the old man's madness. "I thought it was understood that we should not talk of that until tomorrow." "Then we will not talk of it until tomorrow, but read this paper today." "I will not irritate him," thought Edmond, and taking the paper, of which half was wanting, having been burnt, no doubt by some accident, he read, "This treasure, which may amount to 2 of Roman crowns in the most distant of the second opening wood, declared to belong to him allo heir, 25th April, 1490. "Well," said Faria, when the young man had finished reading. "Why," replied Dante, "I see nothing but broken lines and unconnected words.
which are rendered illegible by fire. Yes, to you, my friend, who read them for the first time, but not for me, who have grown pale over them by many nights' study, and have reconstructed every phrase, completed every thought. And do you believe you have discovered the hidden meaning? I am sure I have, and you shall judge for yourself. But first listen to the history of this paper. Silence! Exclaimed Dante. Steps approach. I go. Adieu. And Dante, happy to escape the history and explanation which would be sure to confirm his belief in his friend's mental instability, glided like a snake along the narrow passage, while Faria, restored by his alarm to a certain amount of activity, pushed the stone into place with his foot and covered it with a mat in order the more effectually to avoid discovery. It was the governor, who, hearing of Faria's illness from the jailer, had come in person to see him. Faria sat up to receive him, avoiding all gestures in order that he might conceal from the governor the paralysis that had already half-stricken him with his death. His fear was lest the governor, touched with pity, might order him to be removed to better quarters, and thus separate him from his young companion. But fortunately this was not the case, and the governor left him convinced that the poor madman, for whom in his heart he felt a kind of affection, was only troubled with a slight indisposition. During this time, Edmond, seated on his bed with his head in his hands, tried to collect his scattered thoughts. Faria, since their first acquaintance, had been on all points so rational and logical, so wonderfully sagacious in fact, that he couldn't understand how so much wisdom on all points could be allied with madness. Was Faria deceived as to his treasure, or was all the world deceived as to Faria? Dante remained in his cell all day, not daring to return to his friend, thinking thus to defer the moment when he should be convinced, once for all, that the abbé was mad. Such conviction would be so terrible. But towards the evening, after the hour for the customary visit had gone by, Faria, not seeing the young man appear, tried to move and get over the distance which separated them. Edmond shuddered when he heard the painful efforts which the old man made to drag himself along. His leg was inert, and he could no longer make use of one arm. Edmond was obliged to assist him, for otherwise he would not have been able to enter by the small aperture which led to Dante's chamber. "Here I am, pursuing you remorselessly," he said with a benignant smile. "You thought to escape my munificence, but it is in vain. Listen to me." Edmond saw there was no escape, and placing the old man on his bed, he seated himself on the stool beside him. "You know," said the abbé, "that I was the secretary and intimate friend of Cardinal Spada, the last of the princes of that name. I owe to this worthy lord all the happiness I have ever knew. He was not rich, although the wealth of his family had passed into a proverb, and I heard the phrase very often, as rich as a Spada. But he, like public rumor, lived on his reputation for wealth. His palace was my paradise. I was tutor to his nephews, who are dead, and when he was alone in the world, I tried by absolute devotion to his will to make up to him all he had done for me during 10 years of unremitting kindness. The cardinal's house had no secrets from me. I had often seen my noble patron annotating ancient volumes and eagerly searching amongst dusty family manuscripts. One day, when I was reproaching him for his unavailing searches and deploring the prostration of mind that followed them, he looked at me and, smiling bitterly, opened a volume relating to the history of the city of Rome. There, in the 20th chapter of the life of Pope Alexander VI, were the following lines which I can never forget. The great wars of Romagna had ended. Caesar Borgia, who had completed his conquest, had need of money to purchase all Italy. The Pope had also need of money to bring matters to an end with Louis XII, King of France, who was formidable still in spite of his recent reverses, and it was necessary, therefore, to have recourse to some profitable scheme. which was a matter of great difficulty in the impoverished condition of exhausted Italy. His Holiness had an idea. He determined to make 2 cardinals. By choosing 2 of the greatest personages of Rome, especially rich men, this was the return the Holy Father looked for. In the first place, he could sell the great appointments and splendid offices which the cardinals already held. And then he had the 2 hats to sell besides. There was a third point in view, which will appear hereafter. The Pope and Caesar Borgia first found the 2 future cardinals. They were Giovanni Rospigliosi, who held 4 of the highest dignities of the Holy See, and Cesar Spada, one of the noblest and richest of the Roman nobility. Both felt the high honor of such a favor from the Pope. They were ambitious, and Caesar Borgia soon found purchasers for their appointments. The result was that Rospigliosi and Spada paid for being cardinals, and 8 other persons paid for the offices the cardinals held before their elevation. And thus, 800,000 crowns entered into the coffers of the speculators. It is time now to proceed to the last part of the speculation. The Pope heaped attentions upon Rospigliosi and Spada, conferred upon them the insignia of the cardinalate, and induced them to arrange their affairs and take up their residence at Rome. Then the Pope and Caesar Borgia invited the 2 cardinals to dinner. This was a matter of dispute between the Holy Father and his son. Caesar thought they could make use of one of the means which he always had ready for his friends. That is to say, in the first place, the famous key which was given to certain persons with a request that they go and open a designated cupboard. This key was furnished with a small iron point, a negligence on the part of the locksmith. When this was pressed to effect the opening of the cupboard, of which the lock was difficult, the person was pricked by this small point and died next day. Then there was the ring with the lion's head, which Caesar wore when he wanted to greet his friends with a clasp of the hand. The lion bit the hand thus favored, and at the end of 24 hours, the bite was mortal. Caesar proposed to his father that they should either ask the cardinals to open the cupboard or shake hands with them. But Alexander VI replied, "Now, as to the worthy cardinals, Spada and Rospigliosi, let us ask both of them to dinner. Something tells me that we shall get that money back. Besides, you forget, Caesar, an indigestion declares itself immediately, while a prick or a bite occasions a delay of a day or 2. Caesar gave way before such cogent reasoning, and the cardinals were consequently invited to dinner. The table was laid in a vineyard belonging to the Pope, near San Pierdarino, a charming retreat which the cardinals knew very well by report. Rospigliosi, quite set up with his new dignities, went with a good appetite and his most ingratiating manner. Spada, a prudent man and greatly attached to his only nephew, a young captain of the highest promise, took paper and pen and made his will. He then sent word to his nephew to wait for him near the vineyard, but it appeared the servant did not find him. Spada knew what these invitations meant, since Christianity, so eminently civilizing, had made progress in Rome. It was no longer a centurion who came from the tyrant with a message, "Caesar wills that you die," but it was a legate at a Latere who came with a smile on his lips to say from the Pope, "His Holiness requests you to dine with him." Spada set about at 2 o'clock to San Pierdarino. The Pope awaited him. The first sight that attracted the eyes of Spada was that of his nephew in full costume and Caesar Borgia paying him most marked attentions. Spada turned pale as Caesar looked at him with an ironical air which proved that he had anticipated all, and that the snare was well spread. They began their dinner, and Spada was only able to inquire of his nephew if he had received his message. The nephew replied no, perfectly comprehending the meaning of the question. It was too late, for he had already drunk a glass of excellent wine, placed for him expressly by the Pope's butler. Spada, at the same moment, saw another bottle approaching, which he was pressed to taste. An hour afterwards, a physician declared they were both poisoned through eating mushrooms. Spada died on the threshold of the vineyard. The nephew expired at his own door, making signs which his wife could not comprehend. Then Caesar and the Pope hastened to lay hands on the heritage, under presence of seeking for papers of the dead man. But the inheritance consisted in this only, a scrap of paper on which Spada had written, "I bequeath to my beloved nephew my coffers, my books, and amongst others my breviary with the gold corners, which I beg he would preserve in remembrance of his affectionate uncle." The heirs sought everywhere, admired the breviary, laid hands on the furniture, and were greatly astonished that Spada, the rich man, was really the most miserable of uncles. No treasures, unless they were those of science, contained in the library and laboratories. That was all. Caesar and his father searched, examined, scrutinized, but found nothing, or at least very little, not exceeding a few thousand crowns in plate, and about the same in ready money. But the nephew had time to say to his wife before he expired, "Look well among my uncle's papers. There is a will." They sought even more thoroughly than the august heirs had done, but it was fruitless. There were 2 palaces and a vineyard behind the Palatine Hill. But in these days landed property had not much value, and the 2 palaces and the vineyard remained to the family, since they were beneath the rapacity of the Pope and his son. Months and years rolled on. Alexander VI died, poisoned. You know by what mistake. Caesar, poisoned at the same time, escaped by shedding his skin like a snake. But the new skin was spotted by the poison, till it looked like a tiger's. Then, compelled to quit Rome, he went and got himself obscurely killed in a night skirmish, scarcely noticed in history. After the Pope's death and his son's exile, it was supposed that the Spada family would resume the splendid position they had held before the Cardinal's time. But this was not the case. The Spadas remained in doubtful ease. A mystery hung over this dark affair, and the public rumor was that Caesar, a better politician than his father, had carried off from the Pope the fortune of the 2 cardinals. I say the 2 because Cardinal Rospigliosi, who had not taken any precaution, was completely despoiled. Up to this point, said Faria, interrupting the thread of his narrative, this seems to you very meaningless, no doubt, eh? Oh, my friend, cried Dante, on the contrary, it seems as if I were reading a most interesting narrative. Go on, I beg of you. I will. The family began to get accustomed to their obscurity. Years rolled on, and amongst the descendants, some were soldiers, others diplomatists, some churchmen, some bankers, some grew rich and some were ruined. I come now to the last of the family, whose secretary I was, the Count of Spada. I had often heard him complain of the disproportion of his rank with his fortune, and I advised him to invest all he had in an annuity. He did so, and thus doubled his income. The celebrated breviary remained in the family, and was in the Count's possession. It had been handed down from father to son, for the singular clause of the only will that had been found, and caused it to be regarded as a genuine relic, preserved in the family with superstitious veneration. It was an illuminated book with beautiful Gothic characters, and so weighty with gold that a servant always carried it before the cardinal on days of great solemnity. At the sight of papers of all sorts, titles, contracts, parchments, which were kept in the archives of the family, all descending from the poisoned cardinal, I in my turn examined the immense bundles of documents, like 20 servitors, stewards, secretaries before me. But in spite of the most exhaustive researches, I found nothing. Yet I had read, I had even written a precise history of the Borgia family, for the sole purpose of assuring myself whether any increase of fortune had occurred to them on the death of the Cardinal Cesar Spada, but could only trace the acquisition of the property of the Cardinal Rospigliosi, his companion in misfortune. I was then almost assured that the inheritance had neither profited the Borgias nor the family, but had remained unpossessed like the treasures of the Arabian Nights, which slept in the bosom of the earth, under the eyes of the genie. I searched, ransacked, counted, calculated 1,000 times the income and expenditure of the family for 300 years. It was useless. I remained in my ignorance, and the Count of Spada in his poverty. My patron died. He had reserved from his annuity his family papers, his library, composed of 5,000 volumes, and his famous breviary. All these he bequeathed to me, with 1,000 Roman crowns, which he had in ready money, on condition that I would have anniversary masses said for the repose of his soul, and that I would draw up a genealogical tree and history of his house.